Sup, foo? I'm Leon, the Paperback Maniac, coming at you with the fourth vintage horror book review for Satanic Summer. Today, we are taking a look at Midnight by John Russo. Now, this novel was actually a recommendation by viewer Eric Hoheisel. I admit I probably wouldn't have even thought to include this book in Satanic Summer if he hadn't mentioned it. But, the length was right, I happened to have a beat-up copy, and I'd been meaning to read John Russo for quite some time. So you could say the dark stars all aligned on this one. So thanks, Eric. I appreciate the recommendation. This book was published by Pocket in 1980. I will begin by reading the synopsis from the back cover. The little creatures came to play, and now in fresh-dug graves they lay. Cynthia and her 3 little brothers had heard the stories of their grandpa, who could summon demons and compel people to die with a curse. So when the children discovered that they too had the ancient power, they knew what to do. At first, they caught smallish demons who had assumed the shapes of rabbits and birds, and then larger demons, like the ones who resembled little Jimmy Peterson or his pretty red-haired sister. Now they are growing, their powers swelling, nourished by adult dreams and desires. Soon they will gather their own kind from the earth's dark corners. Soon they will ready their rituals, the blood-red ceremonies performed one by one at midnight. So, in the novel's requisite prologue, we are introduced to Cynthia, her mama, and her 3 older brothers, who have lured and trapped a quote-unquote demon in a steel trap. Now, demons, we learn, can look like ordinary people, like this one right here. So at the start of the novel, Cynthia's brother Luke splits the demon's face and skull open with a shovel, and then he and his brother Abraham commence bashing the thing's body in until it's reduced to nothing but a pulpy, quivering mass. Now, while all of this is happening, Cynthia, who is 10 at the time of the prologue, is a little unnerved that the demon looks an awfully lot like this neighborhood kid that they all know. But her mother, who's there, reminds Cynthia and her brothers that demons can take on the appearance of anything. Rabbits, squirrels, even humans. And it is up to them to suss them out and destroy them. So Cynthia and her 3 brothers learn how to lure and trap demons by their pagan mother, who owns an occult shop, like one of those shops that's all misty with incense and sells things like, amulets and tarot cards and potions. The mother tells the kids stories about their grandpa, who was a feared and respected magician in England back in the day, and who had his own congregation of followers. Now, the children's father, who is often absent and eventually disappears altogether, is very skeptical about these stories that the mother says, and, usually chastises her for filling these young, impressionable minds with such nonsense. But Cynthia and her brothers are totally on board with this and completely buy in and actually dream of one day starting their own congregation of followers, just like their grandfather had. So Cynthia and her brothers help out their mother in her occult shop, like after school and on the weekends, and they become kind of seen as pariahs in the community. They're secretly, talked about and made fun of. They're called the quote-unquote witches' kids. Cynthia intensely delves into studying the occult, and she reads all these books on, spells and sorcery and magic, as well as her grandfather's old notebooks to try to learn, how to do this stuff. And she uses the magic that she's learning to do these rituals, which are performed by catching small animals that she is convinced are demons. And I have to warn any animal lovers out there that there is a particularly nasty scene in this book involving a rabbit that is caught in the steel jaws of a trap. And this thing is like it gets its like jugular veins sliced open, and so that like Cynthia can collect its blood in a witch's bottle, and then it gets like skinned. And abortively, these kids are inexperienced. It just like dumped its bloody carcass, just dropped in like a shoebox. Pretty grisly scene there. Now, Mama tells Cynthia that she is the quote-unquote chosen one, and that she is, quote, her grandfather's receptor and bearer of his blood lineage. And, Mama constantly reminds her and the brothers that, these demons will look like other people. They can look like animals, they can look like humans, and it's up to them to destroy them. So, with Cynthia sort of presiding over the ritualistic aspects of these activities, she and her brothers continue to practice by setting traps and killing and maiming these poor little animals and delighting in finding new ways of torture. And I've got a little quote here to share with you guys from early on in the book. It says, it became a challenge to see who could devise the most ingenious, painful ways of dealing with these enemies. The children grew callous about performing amputations and decapitations, searing live flesh with fire, gouging or poking out eyes, and mutilating genitals. No amount of cruelty was too extreme for the evil spirits embodied by these apparently harmless creatures. Wow, right? We then flash forward a number of years to the present time of the story and are introduced to our protagonist, blonde, pretty, 17-year-old Nancy Johnson, who we quickly learn is a good Christian girl because of her apprehension about going to confession, seeing as the last 2 years she had been living in sin by having sex with her ex-boyfriend and failing to confess about it. But now that they are broken up, Nancy wants to quote-unquote cleanse her soul, so she goes to confess. And her confession is every bit as awful as she had feared it would be, with the priest completely making her feel terrible for living in sin, these mortal sin, these past 2 years, and defiling the sacrament and so on. But Nancy gets through it, is told to make her penance and goes home, chastised and feeling pretty down about herself. Now, Nancy lives with her mom and her stepfather, a local policeman named Bert. Now, this Bert is a real piece of work. Bert, he's a heavy drinker, for one, and he's pretty bitter about his life, including his marriage. Now, Bert's wife, Harriet, who's Nancy's mother, is definitely showing her age, and, she's packed on a bunch of weight since he's married her, and, Bert, feeling relatively young at 45, feels like he deserves better. He feels almost cheated that his wife Harriet has kind of let herself go since they've married. And, he doesn't want to leave her, however, because, before he had met Harriet and married her, he had lived a long, many, many years of kind of being lonely and alone. And he doesn't want that. He just wishes that his wife, he wishes she had some of that same youthful sexuality as her daughter Nancy. Now, Bert, he tries to look at Nancy as a daughter and not like some young, sexy young woman who lives with them. But it's kind of hard when Nancy is always parading around the house in her, skimpy, low-cut t-shirts, possibly to tease him, and, and flaunting her stuff left and right, right? So, we quickly learn that this Bert character is a primo creep. A dude with no scruples, a guy who would consider blackmailing a minor into sleeping with him and his partner in exchange for not turning her in when he discovers a girl having sex with her boyfriend in a car behind a high school. like a real creep. And so, sure enough, one night when he arrives home drunk and he sees Nancy in her nightgown, he bursts into her room with his shirt off and attempts to rape her. And rape her in a scene that is written in a very Richard Lehman-esque way, super pervy. Luckily, just as he's about to do it, Nancy grabs hold of a portable radio and knocks him over the head with it. And then as she's standing there over his unconscious body in her bedroom, she just thinks, oh my God, I cannot imagine ever facing my stepfather or living with him again. And she doesn't want to tell her mom what happened, for fear of wrecking the marriage. Pretty ridiculous, right? So clearly what she needs to do is make like a tree and get out of there, right? So she packs up her bags and she decides she's going to leave. She's going to head for California where her sister lives. So poor teenage Nancy hits the road and she's picked up by a couple of fraternity brothers named Tom and Hank, which you have to admit is kind of funny, who are on their way to Fort Lauderdale for Easter break. And they convince Nancy to come along with them to Florida, spend a few days there, have some fun. She can always, catch a ride from there to head out west to see her sister. So Nancy accepts the invitation, hops in, and they head down to Florida. Now, en route, they pass through a rural town called Cherry Hill in West Virginia, deep in the Bible Belt. This is the kind of town where the deputy doesn't even work past midnight, according to Hank, and it's just as well too, because Tom and Hank are broke-ass college students, and they need to steal food and groceries if they're ever going to make it to California or to Florida. So, Nancy at first is being the good Catholic girl that she is, does not like this idea of stealing food at all, but quickly kind of accepts the reality of the situation. And they go into a grocery store, make off with a haul of food. They are pursued by a police vehicle, which chases them, causing them to kind of swerve off onto a dirt road. And as they're kind of barreling down this dirt road past these dilapidated farmhouses and barns, they almost hit a man who's standing in the middle of the road. This big farmer type character in bibbed overalls who's holding a large package, something that's wrapped up in a soiled sheet. And they almost hit him. The man kind of runs off and runs into the foliage. Now Nancy is really creeped out by this guy when she sees him. She doesn't like. He gives off a really sick, weird vibe. She doesn't like the hideous grin that was plastered on his face, even as the van seemed to be lurching right toward him, and the way that he kind of looked at her. And she also doesn't like the fact that it seemed as if there was something that looked almost like a shoe sticking out of the bundle he was holding. But anyway, they keep going. Nancy and these two guys, they camp out in a field by a stream. They eat their stolen groceries. They smoke some weed. Nancy gets stoned for the first time in her life and absolutely loves it. They get the munchies or the hungries, as Hank calls it, which I thought was kind of funny. And I do believe John Russo is a hippie, so I think he's probably writing from firsthand experience. They're all having fun, though Hank notices that his buddy Tom seems to have a thing for this Nancy girl. And it kind of annoys him because, they had been planning this trip, to go out to Florida, have a good time, be free and wild, not getting all hung up over some girl. So there is a little tension that exists between Nancy and Hank, which leads Nancy to walk off alone into the woods. Tom goes after her to kind of console her. Neither of them notice that they are being watched at the moment by a creep in some bibbed overalls who is kind of leering at them and grinning at the prospect of getting a little closer to this pretty blonde girl and, maybe getting to touch her hair. And then, in the middle of the night, Tom and Hank are viciously awoken by a couple of sheriff's deputies who are pointing some guns at them. They kick these two guys and accuse them of raping, murdering, and disposing of a missing local girl. And they say that they're going to shoot these two if they don't speak up immediately. Now, Tom and Hank are nonplussed. They say, hey, we don't know anything about that. They look around and see that Nancy is missing, and they say, well, we were with this girl, but she must have run off in the middle of the night. And then Hank says, well, you know what, though we did earlier see this kind of weird-looking large farmer-type guy in overalls who was carrying a bundle that, maybe that is the culprit, right? But these cops, they're not buying it, and they make some racist comments, and they threaten them some more. Meanwhile, during all of this, Nancy is watching from behind a tree. She had actually wandered off to the stream in the middle of the night. She comes back. She sees these cops there accosting the two friends. She's a little worried because she thought at first, well, they're probably going to arrest us for stealing those groceries, and she's going to be taken back home. And she definitely doesn't want that. But then as she's watching, she sees things are getting increasingly more violent with these police officers. Eventually, Hank, the black dude, starts running for it after these cops make some racist comments, and one of the cops kind of takes aim, shoots him in the back, killing him. And then the dude Tom runs over to his dead friend, is shocked and saying what are you doing? I can't believe, what kind of police officers are you? And then the other officer takes a beat at his face, fires, and at this point Nancy, who's watching all this from behind a tree, screams and just starts making a run for it. She starts running, and she's pursued by these two cops. Nancy runs through the field, and eventually she sees this red brick house with white shutters, and she runs up to the house. She runs to the front door, trying to get in. It's locked, so she runs around to the back porch, shoves her way inside, gets in, locks the door. She finds that she's in a kitchen. She immediately runs to the drawers and opening the drawers, looking for a knife with which to defend herself. But strangely, no knives. There's a bunch of forks and spoons, not a single knife in the whole kitchen. That's a little odd. She makes her way into sort of a large, elegant foyer with this nice antique furniture and a nice clock and all this stuff. She sees a young woman sitting at a table around her age playing solitaire, and she runs and she starts screaming for the woman to help but this strange girl is paying her no attention. She's just calmly laying her cards on the table. And then Nancy looks up into the room, and her face goes completely white, and she screams when she sees two mangled corpses hanging from the ceiling. And these corpses are in nothing but blood-caked underwear, and they have just a bunch of knives protruding from every part of their body, which explains the lack of knives in the kitchen, right? So when Nancy sees this, she starts screaming, starts to run back outside, and of course runs right into the arms of the two maniacal cops from outside, who throw her back in. They lead her to a wire cage and throw her into a cage next to a cage that actually has another young girl in nothing but her bra and panties, cowering in the corner. They lock the cage. Nancy is screaming, of course, at the top of her lungs the entire time. This strange girl is still just sitting there, laying her cards down as if nothing unusual is happening. And Nancy is thrust into this cage, and she sees in the corner that crazy, demented-looking farmer holding a butcher knife and sharpening it on a whetstone. The dude approaches the cage, starts dancing around the cage maniacally, thrusting the knife in the cage, spinning around and making all these weird sounds. And, this is just a complete nightmare, right? And, as this guy is doing it, one of the young men, one of the cops, he says, Enough, Cyrus, look at the mess you made in here. We have to get this house cleaned up. Mama doesn't like it when it gets messy. And then Nancy looks and notices the bloody holes in the back of the two policemen's uniforms, and figures out that probably those two carcasses hanging in the living room were the original cops who these crazy ass people just killed and like took their clothes, right? So, yes, as you may have guessed, Nancy has fallen into the hands of Cynthia and her family, who, in point of fact, happen to be a quartet of psychotic backwoods Satanists who have been ordered by Mama to acquire 3 girls as human sacrifices for Easter services coming up this upcoming Friday at midnight. And the entire congregation will be there. So, will Nancy be able to escape? Will she make it out of there alive? Or will she be the latest quote-unquote demon ritualistically sacrificed by this fucked up family and its congregation of occultists? So that is your basic story. As you can see, this book is short and it is super fast-paced, which I really appreciated. It moves at a clip. It's got short, punchy chapters, which I just loved. Total binge-worthy entertainment right here. Forget Netflix. I mean, if you want to binge on something, you can binge on this. It's got really strong prose. Mr. Russo is a talented writer. It's written in a breezy, descriptive, compulsively readable style. It's got some super creepy scenes that are actually scary at times. I mean, the whole premise of being like kidnapped by these backwoods crazy Satanists and being thrown in like a dog cage, being forced to wait until like a designated time when you're going to be slaughtered. That's just terrifying, right? Really scary at times. Got some surprisingly good characterization also for such a short and fast-paced book, particularly concerning the other girl who was kidnapped, the one who's in the cage next to Nancy, a girl named Gwen, who is trying to escape so that she can get back to her daughter. It's got some really good, like minor, like character touches that I thought were spot on and believable. The novel also has some interesting religious and eschatological ideas even brought up, such as the nature of a seemingly indifferent God that is will do nothing, will not intervene on behalf of his subjects, and Cynthia even brings up the fact that Nancy's God didn't even intervene on behalf of his own son, who had endured immense pain and torture, and says so who do you think's going to help you now, right? So really just terrifying stuff. It does have a pretty damn dark and macabre ending, which I wasn't quite expecting. And the kind of ending that may leave you feeling a little depressed, and not the type of ending that you often see, even in horror novels. Definitely stuck with me, and I thought it was really well done. As I said, it does have some effectively drawn characters, even when they're unlikable. I fucking detested Nancy's stepfather, Bert. What a fucking scumbag. I mean, not only was he like an odious and rapey motherfucker, but like the way that he kept lying to Nancy's mother, making up stories, besmirching Nancy's character after she had run away for fear that she would like come back and like, tell what he had done. Just like anger inducing. And then at the end, when you think he just may redeem himself, he gets even worse. And it's just like such a gut punch. What a asshole, right? But as I mentioned before, this book in many ways reminds me of a Richard Lehman novel, kind of like definitely in its pacing, in its perverse sexuality, in its rapey ickiness, but also in its entertaining, fast-moving, just B-movie charm. So if you are a fan of Richard Lehman's, as I am, then you just may enjoy this book, I have to say. So, yeah, this book I found out was apparently adapted into a film in 1982, written and directed by John Russo. And I, look forward to checking that out at some point. According to IMDb, he even made a shot-on-video sequel to the film, appropriately titled Midnight 2, in 1993. And I don't know, I may not be as quick to hop on that one, but maybe down the line. Yeah, super fun, fast, nasty little book. I greatly enjoyed it. That is Midnight by John Russo. Fun little pot boiler. If that's your bag, check it out. I had a good time with it. If you've read this book or any other John Russo books, drop a line below in the comments. Let me know if you have any suggestions for what to read next. I'm all for it because I've got a fair number of John Russo books, and I definitely look forward to reading more because he's a great writer. I really enjoyed it. So that's it, dude. I'm out. Hope you guys enjoyed the review. Till next time, peace.